Continuing on from the last few episodes, we're going to create another menu in this episode. Only this time we're going to create I want to avoid saying parent menu because parent menu might get confused with our parent classes, but let's say our top menu, the menu that we use to access other menus, and in this case, the other category of menus. So this will be the game menu, which we will use either I on our keyboard to access or select or back button on an Xbox or PlayStation controller. Let's go ahead and get started with that. Down to user interface. What I want to do instead of duplicating one of these menus here is I want to create a menu specifically for duplicating. So it's just a user widget. It's never going to be used. It's just going to hold all the elements. So instead of duplicating one of these guys and deleting all of the elements inside of it until it's stripped down to what we want, we can just duplicate that menu and add what we want later. So hopefully it makes the creation process a lot easier. So right click, go to user interface, click on widget blueprint, and let's type in menu _ template. Double click on template, attach that tab up here. And what we'll do is go back to our other menus, let's say the pause menu, and have a look at what we've got going on here. A border followed by a background blur, and then there's our first vertical box. And that's exactly what we'll have in our template menu. So if we select the border here and hit copy, and then we go to our template menu, select the canvas panel and hit paste, it will copy over the entire menu. Now this hasn't copied over anything in the event graph, it's just copied over the designer side. What we want to do is simplify this so we can keep duplicating it in the future. So let's get rid of our quit button. Let's get rid of our options, load, save. We'll leave one button here as reference. We'll also leave the title here and we'll actually name it title. So F2 to rename rich text _ title. And then it's not in the center as well. So we'll click on border, move the position to 0 and 0. Now our button is down here. That's fine. Again, this is just a template. We'll just rename this to first button and rename this title to title. Let's click on that menu button, hit fill, and when we want to add a different button in the future, we'll just make sure that the last button in our menu is the button that's filled to keep it centered there. You could also say call this button the last button, and then remind yourself that, hey, the last button is what needs to be filled here. So we'll rename button continue to button last. And we'll just leave it like that. We've got our border, background blur, and a vertical box aligning everything. So let's compile and save that. The other thing we'll do is pop back over to the pause menu, go to the graph, and we'll copy over our event construct and our event tick, because these are going to look the same for every menu as well. The only difference is going to be we're going to put our first button here, and we're going to also put whatever other buttons we have here. So let's copy over this stuff, back over to template, hit the graph. We don't need this pre-construct. We can use this one. It's exactly the same here. An event construct automatically ties itself to whatever blueprint it's in. It's not as if we're using the event construct from the last blueprint. This node knows what blueprint it's in. So let's compile. We've got some errors because those buttons don't exist, which is fine. Our continue button technically doesn't exist either because we renamed it. Now, another way we could go about this is make this the first button again, which I think now that I'm doing this, I'm going to keep it as the first button. So we'll call this first button for this reason here. The first button of the menu is the first button that we're going to want to have focus on. So now we can set this up ahead of time. And if we rename this, it should automatically rename here, meaning we don't even have to set this up every time. When we copy this code over or when we duplicate this menu, it will automatically have the first button of the menu in focus. And then we'll also drag down that button here. Now, there aren't going to be menus with less than 3 buttons, I don't think. So we'll just get rid of 2 of these nodes and we can add them back as per menu. So that's our entire template pretty much ready. The only other thing we could really do is make sure that that first button on clicked is ready to go, because again, that should change its name as well. Let's compile and save. We've got the tick of approval from Unreal, so that's all good. So we just have to remember that our last button is the button that needs to be filled, and then our menu should be centered from there. So let's go ahead and make a menu off this template menu. Saving all of our content just in case. Right click on template and duplicate. And we're going to call this menu underscore game. And we'll pop into game menu. So there are 7 menus that this menu will access. And it'll also give you, the viewer, a good idea of the other menus we'll be creating. I'll be creating these ones in future. I don't want to do 20 menu videos back to back. I like to break it up, give you a little bit of variety if you've been following along since the beginning. So let's start by clicking on the title and change this to game menu or whatever you want. Now let's click on the first button and we'll rename this button to map. That'll be one of the menus we create later on. With map selected, let's duplicate it and we'll call this one missions, or if you wanted to, you could call it quests as well. Next up, let's duplicate another button and we'll call this one equipment. So I will use this menu in order to, oh, it'd help if I put button at the beginning, wouldn't it? I'll use this menu to equip our character with different types of armor and potentially rearrange his weapons, maybe add some mods, that sort of thing. But again, in a much later video. With equipment selected, let's duplicate again. And we will call this one inventory. Duplicate again. And this will be our skills menu. This will be where we use the skills earned from gaining experience levels, and experience is definitely a video that's coming up soon, along with inventory as well. Next up is statistics. This is where the player would go if they wanted to see, say, how many steps they've walked. Now, I'm not necessarily going to do steps, but there's time played, which Unreal is very happy to provide us. And then last up, one more duplicate, and we're going to call this one tutorials. So when we put a tutorial message up for our player to say, understand how to, press A to jump, instead of just putting that on the screen, we'll save it to this menu as well. So that if the player was like, wait, how do I jump? I know it's a really stupid example because like everyone knows how to jump in a game, but we'll just put all of our tutorial menus in there. So those are the 7 menus. Let's also click on the rich text blocks as well and make sure that they're doing the same thing. And if you want to keep them spaced out like this, feel free to, but I would like them to all be together. So I'm going to select the buttons themselves because selecting the rich text block won't do anything. And now with them selected, now that we have them selected together, we actually have to scroll down to get to the layout section. So if we click auto, then they'll be somewhat in the center. Now back over to the graph, we can see that our button has automatically updated. So that's the button that will be in focus when we start this menu. And then we'll just attach our other buttons here as well in the same order. So we'll add missions, add a few more pins. We had 7 buttons, so we'll get up to the number 6 because arrays start counting at 0. Line them up horizontally. And then once they're lined up horizontally, select them all and press Q, and that will line them up vertically. And there's the basic code of our menu pretty much done. The other thing we could do here is select each of the menus and arrange them so when we want to come in and code them, the button's already there. And this is ready to go. By the time this menu is done in the future, because we're going to need to add to this menu as we do each of these other menus, by the time this is done, this entire menu will be populated. So that's what the basic code looks like. Make sure to compile and save when you're done. Now, the other thing that we need to do, because this menu is accessed from a state of the game being played and we need to pause the game, that means we need to update our player controller so that it knows to enter this menu. So click on Core under Blueprints, click on PC_Hero, and we need to create this line of code for our menu. Right click and select Game Menu. Action events. We put this in our inputs inside of our project settings. We're not going to copy everything over because it's much cleaner. Just create a widget like this, grab a brand new node, and then select the menu you want. So game menu, plug that in there, get a reference to self, which is a reference to this player controller. And then we can copy the rest of these guys over. So just Control C, Control V, plug that in there, and that menu should pretty much be ready to go. Now there's one thing our menu is missing that we're going to need if we want this to be completely functional. And that is a way to get out of the pause state and remove the mouse cursor. So compile and save this. Back to the game menu, we need one more button. So tutorials won't be our final button. Our final button will be the back button. So right click on tutorials and duplicate. We'll change this tutorials to the back button. Select the rich text, change that to back. Now select the tutorials, hit auto, and then select the back button and select the text block and align that to the bottom like so. Remember to name the button as well. So we'll name this back, compile and save that. Over to the graph, click on the back button and click on the on-clicked option. While I remember here, over to the top, add another pin and we'll drag over the back button so that it can be in focus. If a button is not in here, it will not be functional for the gamepad. It might work for the mouse, but the gamepad will miss out on its functionality because when you press A or X on the gamepad, then it's looking for that focus. Over to the back button, we'll code that. Over to our pause menu again, because we're going to refer to that code. We want the continue code for this because that does the same thing. So here we are in the graph of our pause menu. We want to replicate this code, and this code doesn't have anything too specific in it. So we can actually copy this over to the game menu and paste it and plug that into the back button. I'm going to just straighten that up. Now compile and save that. And when we hit play, if I was to press I and move my hands away from the mouse and just use the directional pad, I can select all of these buttons. Now that back button's a little bit big on account of it being filled, so we'll go back and fix that. But let's just check that this is functional. So none of these buttons should do anything, and you can see that they are, when I press enter, they are actually being selected, and that's when the next line of code would fire off. But let's hit back and we are moving in our game again. Press I again, go down to back, good stuff. And if we press escape and don't get any errors, that's a good sign. So let's go back to our menu game, back to the designer, and change this vertical alignment here under button back to the bottom. So now we'll just select the bottom there and we'll compile and save that. Back to the test map, hit play, click on the map so that the game is active, press I, go down, and the back button is just the height of the back button. And that'll just about do it for the menus now. We're going to take a break from these menus and move on to some other stuff in the future.